The GTX 780 Ti is Nvidia's best graphics card from 2013, and in 2025 it can be found for around $40 on the used market. But is it any good at playing games at 1080p in the modern day? Well, to find out, we've tested it, and yeah, the performance out of this thing is kind of surprising. The 780 Ti gives off OG GTX Titan levels of performance for around half the price, but for this you're getting half of the VRAM. 3GB of VRAM back in 2013 would have been fine for basically every single game, particularly at 1080p, but in 2025 that's really not a lot. But it had a brand new core with the GK110B, which also meant it supported DirectX 11.1 at a feature level, which the older Titan and 780 didn't. So it's got more cores and ROPs. But how much does this help it out in 2025? And to find out, we've tested it at 1080p in our 13700K test bench. All of the specs for this will be found in the description below, along with my Amazon affiliate links. I do make a small kickback from these, and it does really help out the channel. Our 780 Ti's got brand new RTX MX4, as this thing was running pretty toasty out of the box, and the driver version we've used for testing is 475.14, which is the latest game ready for Kepler graphics cards. Other than that, we've maxed out the power slider to give the 780 Ti a bit more of a fighting chance. Firstly, we're greeted with some pretty nice performance. The Witcher 3 on the DirectX 11 API with the medium preset nets us some pretty decent performance with the 780 Ti. More than 70 FPS on average at 1080p is very nice, and that 1% low trailing behind by just 10 frames per second, in my book that is really good performance, all things considered, on the enhanced edition of The Witcher 3, so not bad 780 Ti. This time around on Cyberpunk 2077 we've only gone for the low preset and not my custom lowest one, and to be fair it's really not that bad. 37 FPS on average with a 1% low, which is still pretty decent, is okay in my book. Just to think that Cyberpunk launched in an absolutely terrible state and is playable on a Kepler graphics card now is pretty good all things considered, even though 37 FPS isn't necessarily the most playable experience. Red Dead Redemption 2 on the other hand is really not that bad today. Unlike with the 680, we haven't had to go down to 768p, and we even got away with the high textures at full HD, so yeah, it really doesn't look that bad. And the performance, it's okay with 40 frames per second and a really good 1% low as well relative to the average frame rate. I would say this is similar to an Xbox One level of performance. It looks around the same, to be honest, and yeah, you're getting a bit more frames than the console, so that's got to be known right there. Yeah, the AAA games that we used for testing today were really not that bad. Getting more than like 60 FPS in The Witcher 3 on the medium preset is pretty wild on this graphics card, I'm not going to lie, and even then we managed to keep it all at 1080p. With Red Dead Redemption 2 we didn't need to drop down to 768p because an extra gigabyte of VRAM really does go a long way when the frame buffer's kinda small. Allowing the 780 Ti to stretch its legs in some eSports games is really a good idea, just to show how well this graphics card can still get on. And in Fortnite with the performance API, yeah, like 400 frames per second on average is really good from this graphics card, and that 1% low, considering it's an Unreal Engine 5 game as well, is really good. Yeah, the 13700K is definitely doing some carrying here, and if you had like a, I don't know, like a 3rd or 4th gen i7, you will see lower performance, but this is what the 780 Ti can do, and what it can do in Fortnite is, it's pretty good. This extends into Rainbow Six Siege, even though we're not getting as glamorous performance here, but 150 FPS on average with 110 for the 1% low is still really good performance in my opinion, and I think most people would be able to game competitively with this level of performance. So if you just found a 780 Ti, yeah, Rainbow Six Siege on the low preset at full HD is certainly playable. Counter-Strike is arguably the most competitive out of the bunch, so you're going to need some pretty good frames in this game in order to win your games. Luckily, we're getting more than 200 FPS on average with a pretty good 1% low at 146. So if you had a 144Hz monitor, I think the 780 Ti is perfectly fine for this, and I don't think you'd be running into that many problems even though Counter-Strike 2 is a bit more of a CPU demanding game, but we were fully GPU bound today. Just like previous Kepler graphics cards we've taken a look at, eSports games are performing totally fine here. This is probably the 13700K carrying a bit, but we want to see what the graphics card itself can do, and what the 780 Ti can do across the eSports games we've tested is absolutely brilliant. Fortnite, Counter-Strike and even Rainbow Six Siege this time are all performing brilliantly with very high frame rates, and if you wanted to get into a competitive mindset, or just the scene in general, this graphics card is enough for that on a budget, or maybe you might have been given one of these. Anyways, it can do it. We can't test an old graphics card without testing some old games, so I decided to play some Halo Reach on this, and I'm glad I did, because on the enhanced preset, which looks better than the original 360 version, and it's also running at 1080p and at a much higher frame rate of 159. Also, that 1% low of 152 is still really good, especially when there's all the particle effects coming off the grunts when you headshot them. There's quite a bit of confetti. Anyways, I could game all day on Halo Reach on this graphics card with absolutely zero problems. Another game I could play without any problems is GTA 5's Legacy Edition on the high preset with very high textures and 2x MSAA. We're getting a nice and smooth experience here with 95 FPS on average with a really good 1% low of 73 as well. GTA 5 looks absolutely brilliant on the high preset, even though you could push it a bit further and put some of the settings on very high or even ultra. Will you be playing the enhanced edition with ray tracing? Not on a 780 Ti, but you will be getting a good experience on the legacy version of the game. I always like to test Minecraft on older graphics cards like this, mainly because it's really easy to run and it's my favourite game of all time. With the sodium mod, 16 chunks of render distance, and the fancy settings, the 780 Ti is not even GPU bound. At 800 FPS on average, the 13700K is the limiting factor here, which is kind of wild. That 1% low is almost half of the average frame rate, but this is just Java edition of Minecraft. When it's loading in new chunks, you are bound to see a few stutters. This was taken in a brand new world, so performance over time will start to fall, especially as you start to build farms and stuff like that. So keep that in mind, but 800 FPS is a really good baseline. And the baseline preset in Skyrim Special Edition was the Ultra preset. This is what it defaulted to, and I was like, yeah, let's just keep it on this, and it's a good job I did, because 60 FPS on average with 59 FPS for that 1% low is indicating that we're engine limited here, as the creation engine, it doesn't like frame rates of over around 60-ish, as it just goes all to whack. Anyways, if you like Skyrim and by extension Fallout 4, these will both run perfectly fine on a GTX 780 Ti with absolutely zero issues. Just like the esports games, older titles are perfectly fine on the 780 Ti, and even then we were kind of suffering from success as Minecraft was still CPU bound with a 13700K, but do you really need more than 800 FPS in Minecraft? No, I don't think so. Oh, also, the 780 Ti might be better than a 5090 in some older indie titles because it supports 32-bit CUDA, and what this means is you can enable PhysX with basically no downsides because this GPU will support that. So if you wanted to play games like Borderlands 2 or Arkham City, yeah, the PhysX features will work perfectly fine on this graphics card, where they probably won't on something like a 5080 or a 5090. And I think you would agree with me when I say the 780 Ti is perfectly fine for a retro machine, and doubly so because it's got an analog output. So if you wanted to play on a CRT monitor natively without any adapters or anything like that, the 780 Ti's got an analog output, which is kind of what saved us today, as the HDMI port and the display port are kind of busted on this and they don't display out, even though the analog DVI works totally fine. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows with the 780 Ti, there are quite a few downsides. One of them is the power consumption. This consumed around 250 watts in our testing, which is a lot of power considering the performance you're getting. And like I say with every single video featuring a Kepler graphics card, this doesn't support DirectX 12 at a feature level, and it hasn't received game ready drivers for about 4 years now, so if you wanted to play anything, well, made within that time, it's not really going to have a nice time playing them, or it won't start them, which is the most likely option. And it's because of that why I don't really recommend buying a GTX 780 in 2025. But if you've been past one, or you've just found one, or you found one for like $10 or something like that, it's really not a terrible graphics card, especially if you keep your expectations in check. Anyways, if you want to see how a more modern budget graphics card gets on that will play basically every single game on the market, you can watch this one up here. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.